Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I make my homemade apple cider recipe using no special equipment. For this recipe, all I use is a stove and a stock pot. If you have a crock pot at home, you can definitely make this recipe in your crock pot, but if you don't, then you can follow along and make it exactly the way I do. Let's get started. So for today's apple cider, I'm going to be using a variety of apples, and I highly recommend that you also use a variety in your recipe because it'll give your cider a more complex flavor. So I'm going to be working with some Fuji apples, some Honeycrisp apples, and I also have some green Granny Smith apples here. In addition to that, we're going to be adding some citrus to our apple cider recipe today. This is an optional step, but I highly recommend it. So I'll be using one navel orange and one lemon from my local grocery store. To get started, we're going to cut up our apples, and this is really an easy step because you're going to use the whole apple. Make sure you keep in the peel. It'll give your apple cider a nice color. And we're also going to include the core in this step because we don't have to take it out. When we go ahead and strain our apple cider at the end of this process, the core and all of the seeds will get removed through that part. So you can just go ahead and cut all your apples into fours and throw them right in your pot. Let's go. Next up, we're going to be adding our citrus to the pot. I'm using here one navel orange and one lemon. There are a few different approaches you can take to add in your citrus. I know some people like to zest the peel and then squeeze the juice in later. I prefer to just peel the citrus first and then add it directly into the pot. One thing to keep in mind when you're peeling your citrus is to avoid getting the pith in there, which is that white part of the citrus. You don't want to include the pith in your pot because it tends to have a bitter taste that can affect the ultimate flavor of your cider. So you'll see as I'm peeling my citrus, I'm going to be as intentional as I can about avoiding the pith. All right, y'all. So I have finished adding in my apples and my citrus to the pot. Next up is my favorite part. We're going to throw in some spices. So today we're working with white sugar, whole cinnamon sticks, some whole clove, and some ground up allspice. I'm just going to add these as much as feels right, but I will throw in some measurements in the description below so that if you prefer to have a more precise approach to your recipe, then you can do it that way as well. Let's go. So I'm going to start with about 2 tablespoons of white sugar, sprinkling that all around. I'm going to stick with 2 tablespoons because, like I said, we have some sweet apples in here already, so we don't want to add too much sweetness to the pot. All right, for the cinnamon sticks, we'll be adding 2 cinnamon sticks. I do prefer my cider on the more cinnamony side, but you're welcome to only add 1 cinnamon stick or leave out cinnamon altogether if that's your preference. We have some whole clove here. Just sprinkle that all around. You don't need too much clove. Clove is a pretty powerful spice on its own. And last but not least, we have some allspice ground up. As y'all can see, I got all of my spices from Whole Foods Market. They did not sponsor this video, but they should. Let's go ahead and take the lid off for this because I like a good bit of allspice in my recipe. That's probably about 2 tablespoons or so. All right, and our very last step in this recipe is to cover everything with water. There is no exact amount of water that you need to add. You just want to make sure that you add enough water to cover all of the fruit. Water from Whole Foods. Wow, would you look at that? Look how pretty. And once I put the pot on the stove, I'll add the tiniest bit more water on top to make sure everything is submerged. All right, y'all, and here we have it. All of our ingredients are in the pot and it's ready to go on the stove. Now, before I move on, I do want to say if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like and comment and make sure you subscribe to my channel. So our first step is going to be to put our pot on the stove and bring it to a boil. You want to get your water to a rolling boil, which usually takes about an hour. Just make sure you're keeping an eye on the pot because as soon as it gets to a boil, you want to turn that heat all the way down to a low simmer. We're going to let it simmer for about 3 to 4 hours and then we'll move on to our next step. So I'll see y'all in 4 hours. Okay, y'all, so why did the apple pie go to the dentist? Because it needed a filling. Anyways, all right, y'all. So our cider is ready. It's been sitting on the stove for just over 4 hours. The last step in this process is to transfer it from our pot into a bowl using a cheesecloth to strain out those larger pieces of pulp. The cheesecloth is going to help get as much moisture out as possible. And then before we put it in the final container, which will be used for bottling, I'll run it one more time through a strainer. So let's get started. All right, so I decided to grab a spoon because it was, of course, splashing everywhere, and I think the spoon is going to help us keep a little better control as we transfer our mixture over. All right, y'all, and here we have it, our picture of homemade apple cider. Apple cider can be enjoyed hot or as a cold beverage. I personally enjoy mine over a glass of ice, sometimes with a shot of whiskey in it. I want you to comment below to tell me how you prefer to drink your apple cider and let me know what you think of this recipe. Thanks for watching.